Order. Welcome everybody tonight. It's a dreary day out there, but it's not snow, so we're going to, just so you know that this meeting is being video recorded. Rob, our communications chief, wanted me to inform you of that. So thank you, Council, for coming out. We're a few short, but we have a quorum, so again, thank you. Anybody has a declaration of pecuniary interest, you can state it now or later. I'd like you to know that this statutory meeting is under the Planning Act, and it's under Section 1715 of the Planning Act, and this is called Recolour Grey, and this is a statutory public meeting. So our planning team, headed by Randy Schertzer, Director of Planning, is going to make a presentation. It'll be up on the screen. And after the presentation, you will be certainly welcome to come up to the podium. If you would be, when you come up to the podium, to ask questions, please state your name and municipality. The information will be recorded by our staff. So that being said, Randy, please begin the presentation. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Warden Halliday and members of council, and of course, members of the public. Thank you for attending tonight's public meeting. I'm going to introduce Scott Taylor, our senior planner.
Mic up a bit, please. Hey, turn it up. We can't hear back here.
Okay, I'll try and talk louder. Can you hear me now?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. So Scott Taylor, our senior planner, is going to start us off with the presentation. The presentation will be up on all 4 screens, and then we'll go through this presentation for us tonight.
Speak right into the mic, it works. Speak right into.
Great, thanks Randy, and thanks to everyone who came out tonight, both public and council. If at any point you can't hear, please do let me know. There's no point in listening to someone talk if you can't hear them. So why we're here tonight? We're here tonight to talk about Recolour Grey, which is the new proposed draft official plan, and we're here tonight to get feedback on it. Before we do get feedback on it, we do want to walk you through a little bit of what the purpose of tonight is all about, what the official plan is all about, how it may either benefit or impact you, where we're at in the process and what's still to come. And we're also going to highlight both some key changes in the draft official plan versus the current official plan, as well as highlighting some comments that we've received to date on the official plan. And certainly with the crowd here tonight, we hope to hear more comments following our presentation. As Randy noted and the warden noted, we will have lots of time for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. So just to start with, we're going to give you a bit of Planning 101. So we need to start with what is an official plan. So an official plan is a broad document. It generally tries to look 20 years into the future to plan for our needs over those 20 years. When I say our needs, I mean everything from growth to where our farmland is going to be, to where some of our natural areas are going to be, also to where our infrastructure needs are, our roads and our pipes in the ground and everything else. Official plans are what they call living documents. That means they can be amended from time to time. And certainly every year since the official plan has been in existence, we've seen amendments each year. And by allowing for these amendments, it allows the plan to stay current. And then every now and then you get these broad changes or new official plans to give a complete refresh to the plan. Our plan works in concert with local zoning bylaws. So the plan is policy. It's broadly written versus a zoning bylaw is very specific. It would get right down into specific setbacks, i.e. your house needs to be X number of meters from the road or Y number of meters to the side yard lot line. Official plans within Ontario must be consistent with a provincial document called the Provincial Policy Statement, which acts as the province's official plan, if you will, and their guiding principles down to the municipalities. And we also need to conform to other provincial plans, and in this area that would be the Niagara Escarpment Plan. When we look at an official plan, the first question for anyone here tonight is probably, well, how is my life going to change, or how is my property going to change if the county and the province were to approve this official plan? If you currently have property, you have a house on that property, or you have a business on that property, and you're not looking to make any major changes, then this official plan won't really impact you too much. If you want to redevelop your land, so maybe you want to sever a piece of land, or maybe you want to build a new business on a piece of land, then the official plan may come into play, and we may need to consult that document to see what's considered for your land, and then you would also be talking to your municipality to look at the zoning for the property. In some cases, the new official plan will make it easier for development. There's a number of policies in there that it will make it easier both within town and even for on-farm businesses to allow for new developments. And there are areas in the official plan that will be more restrictive on development. There are certain cases where we can be restrictive on development for the reasons of environmental protection. And in other cases, there's restrictions on development where we want to separate farm development from new residential development, for example. As I said, the official plan doesn't necessarily affect your day-to-day until either you or maybe one of your neighbors wants to redevelop your property. We do encourage everybody, and I was just chatting with some folks in the back, to look at the official plan and to look at the zoning when you go to perhaps buy new property, because it will give you an indication of not only what might happen in the future on your land, but also what your neighbors might be able to do in the future. So it is a key document in that regard. And we want to work with partners like our municipalities, our conservation authorities, our real estate agents, to really get the message out there on what the official plan may mean when it comes to their land. As I noted, one of the key mapping features in the official plan, aside from the environmental features, is mapping out our agricultural lands as well as our other resource lands where we might see sand and gravel extraction in the future. This Recolour Gray process, as we branded it, began on May the 3rd of 2016. Since then, we've had a lot of open houses. We've been to libraries and classrooms to talk to students. We've had workshops at each of our 9 municipalities. We went out to fall fairs. We went out to farmers markets and bike races and various other sessions, all with the aim of getting public feedback. And so we've been getting feedback for about 2 years now. And it really has shaped and driven this process. And I know at times there can be a feeling that when you send in a comment that it may not matter, but I can tell you, and we have the paper trail to prove it, that the comments we've gotten to date really have shaped this plan, and we certainly expect some of the comments that we receive here tonight to shape the next draft of this official plan. So that's just some numbers for you, but it's been a long but very rewarding process in terms of some of the feedback we've heard in this regard. So where we're at tonight, as you're aware, we have the draft official plan now since November. The maps are hanging up in the back, and we also have about a 200-page policy document, if you will. We have had a number of sessions recently, including open houses, to get comments on this. All the documents are posted on our county website for review, and we've been meeting with individual landowners and stakeholders to get their comments. The purpose of tonight is to get further comments before we take all those comments back and look at what further changes might be needed. Under the provincial legislation in Ontario, which is the Planning Act, we are required to have at least one public meeting. At this point, we've had approximately 40 sessions so far, so we're exceeding our requirements because we really do want to hear from everybody. And I'm actually just going to turn my back here to council for a second because I want to do a quick informal poll of the audience to see how you heard about the meeting tonight. So anybody who heard about the meeting on the radio, can you put up your hand? Couple. Anybody who heard about the meeting through a targeted email, maybe you signed up for our email list, can you put up your hand? Excellent. Anybody who saw a notice in the paper, could you put up your hand there too? Okay, great. Any others that I missed that you heard about it? Maybe a neighbor told you or something else? Yeah? Okay, great. Great. We've tried to communicate as broadly as possible to make sure as many people heard as possible. We know we've missed some people. We're trying hard to get as many people as we can, but these are the avenues we've explored to date, so thank you for that. So within the official plan, once we had gone through some of the initial consultation, we grouped the official plan into 5 key topics. We call them themes. The first is Cultivate Gray. The second is Develop Gray. The third is Natural Gray. The fourth is Live Gray, and then we have Move Gray. And what you're going to hear about right now is a little snapshot into what each of these 5 themes means and what's covered under them. So Cultivate Gray. Cultivate Gray is our rural and our agricultural areas. It's also our resource areas where we have sand and gravel extraction and forestry. Within the Cultivate Gray section, there's a number of key changes. It's going to be easier, as I said earlier, to have an on-farm business. So if you have a farm and you'd like to diversify your income by putting up, whether it's a pick-your-own operation or whether it's even, say, a small welding shop, it is going to become easier to do so. We've also looked at the severance policies within our agricultural, rural, and special agricultural areas. We're going to be including some criteria for where someone is looking at severing a new farm size lot in agriculture. And we're also going to be looking at some criteria for where someone may need to sever one of those on-farm businesses. So specifically, if you had, say, an abattoir on a farm, the abattoir is growing successful, and for business reasons, you need to separate that abattoir for the farm, that will become easier than in previous iterations of the plan. We've clarified some of the policies around severances and around lot additions, where somebody might be consolidating land. We've also looked at allowing for a little bit more flexibility in our rural designation to allow for some recreational uses across the rural area, maybe even allow for different types of farming, including farm cooperatives, or one of the local buzzes has been agriminiums, where you might have a condominiumized farm, if you will, where joint owners would say own the equipment and the land, but then each still have their own house on the farm. We also want to look, when we're looking at our rural and agricultural areas, at the entire food system. So everything from food production to distribution and retail. We're going to be implementing some of the provincial changes with respect to the separation distances between barns and manure storage and houses and non-farm areas. We're going to be updating our sand and gravel and quarry extraction policies to look at more comprehensive rehabilitation needs for the land, as well as considering some of the cumulative impacts where we have multiple pits and quarries in close proximity to one another. And we're also going to provide some policies which link the county's current forest management bylaw, which used to be called our tree cutting bylaw, to the official plan and generally promote good forestry practices. Under Natural Gray, these are our key environmental areas across the county, including our wetlands and our woodlands. But it's also getting into some of our recreational areas and our parklands as well. We are going to be looking at some changes to the plan, which will bring the plan in line with a provincial document called the Natural Heritage Reference Manual, which was released in 2010. What that will have the effect of doing is to increase some of the buffer areas around these woodlands or wetlands where further study may be needed before major new development could take place. We are also looking at mapping out our core areas, which we're calling our superstar areas of natural natural environment, and the linkage policies to include those lands and those in the plan for the first time. And in many cases, those core areas overlap with our existing wetlands and our woodlands. And the linkages are going to be the potentially natural corridors that link these together. The linkages aren't meant to be public trails in that regard, but more meant to be follow water courses and other areas where wildlife might be moving between. We're going to look at updating our significant woodlands mapping to make sure it reflects what's actually on the ground today. We're going to look at our environmental impact study policies to clarify the requirements there and possibly look at scoping it and making it easier for people to complete one of these studies when they're necessary. We've got some general policies around recreation, tourism, and parks, encouraging these uses across the county. And we're also going to be looking at some climate change policies to really try to prepare for the future and what our changing climate might mean to Grey County. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to do the next portion of the presentation.
So with respect to Develop Grey, We're looking to remove tertiary settlement areas. We're simply just looking to combine tertiary and secondary settlement areas as one to ultimately reduce redundancy in our plan. The policies with respect to both are remaining very much the same. When it comes to Sunset Strip and Business Park north of Mount Forest, we're proposing these as separate designations because of their unique servicing requirements. So in this case, they are dry servicing areas, so they have their own septic and private wells, so they don't have access to municipal servicing. We're also looking to combine the space extensive industrial and commercial land uses into one land use type. This again is to simply reduce redundancy in our plan. The policies as they stand today, they are very much the same. And as well, we're looking to include policies that support healthy communities. What we mean by this is to include policies that speak to encouraging walkable environments, encouraging green space, shaded areas, etc. As well, policies encouraging economic development. We want to make sure that people that are looking to create a business or start a business in the area have their lands available, readily available for development. As well, the majority of employment directed to settlement areas. However, we are aware that a lot of Grey County, predominant majority of population live in rural areas, so we want to also encourage employment opportunities in our rural lands. With respect to Live Grey, we have further policies that support consultation with our First Nations and Métis groups in the area. As well, we're looking to have policies that are generally permissive of secondary units, provided they meet building code requirements, as well as zoning provisions outlined by the local municipalities. As well, we want to achieve a minimum target of 30% of new housing or units created by conversion to be affordable for each member municipality. 30% of total housing residential development within primary settlement areas will be medium to high density. As well, we want to advance ecotourism, agritourism, cultural tourism opportunities in the county and support linkages to surrounding regional cultural facilities. And as well, we want to permit age-friendly options and implement healthy communities checklist. I'm going to pass it on to Randy to speak to Move Grey.
So Move Grey considers how we move people, goods, and information into, out of, and through the county. Grey County is a large area, and moving around the county can be a challenge. We need to ensure that we have the transportation services and technology in place to support the needs of our residents, tourists, and businesses so that we can grow and thrive. With that, some of the policy recommendations that are in the draft official plan currently, one is to develop an overall complete transportation system. This is a transportation system that supports different modes of travel, whether it be car and vehicles on our roads, paved shoulders, trails, transit, airports, and harbors. We want to look at developing the entire transportation system as a whole. We also want to look at the required number of accesses for new developments from an emergency access standpoint. We've heard comments on previous applications about the required number of accesses for new developments, so we include some policies with respect to that. We've also developed a functional classification of our county roads. And what this is essentially is identifying what the function of the county road is, and then coming up with some policies and standards to support the function of that road. We also have a policy in there to promote paved shoulders on most, if not all, of our county roads. We've also identified potential planned county road corridors, and that's on one of the maps called Appendix D, which identifies some links that we think in the end should be county road corridors, again to support that overall complete transportation system. We also have policy in there to support connecting links. These are county roads that go through settlement areas, and we think that through a connecting link program, local municipalities will be able to better operate, maintain, as well as look after things like entrances and other things along those stretches of road where county roads go through settlement areas. We have policies to support active transportation and establishing a county-wide transit system. These are two comments that come up time and time again when we're talking with people about the need to support active transportation and the need to develop a county-wide transit system. We also have policies to support the use of existing airports, ports, harbors, and marinas. We have policies to support broadband and fiber throughout the county, including fiber or conduit being included in new developments or when we're reconstructing roads or even trails in some cases. We also have a number of policies with respect to our waste and our landfills and encouraging strategies to reduce potential waste, including looking at new waste management technologies, as well as implementing the findings of the historic landfill study. There have been a number of mapping changes, and some of those have already been highlighted by Scott and Stephanie in their slides. But just to go through some of them, the significant woodlands, we've updated this using the most up-to-date air photos that we have. So we think that the significant woodlands layer is more accurate than what it's been in the past. We've identified cores and linkages based on our natural heritage system study, or what we call green and gray. We've updated wellhead protection areas and intake protection zones based on the source protection plans. We've updated the hazard lands data using the most current layers from the conservation authorities. We've updated the Niagara Escarpment Plan data based on what was approved by the province for the Niagara Escarpment Plan. We've added in significant value lands. We've also identified, as I mentioned, functional classification of county roads. We've combined space-extensive commercial industrial into one designation, as well as we've updated some other layers that are primarily updated by the province. These are our areas of natural and scientific interest, our provincially significant wetlands, our licensed pits and quarries, other wetlands, and karst. So these are other layers that we're in the process of updating based on provincial data. All these mapping changes can be accessed through the website. So if you go onto gray.ca and look up Recolour Gray, all the draft map schedules and appendices are on the website. We also have some of those at the back of the room today. Our GIS staff have also developed an interactive map which allows you to go in, zoom into your property, and compare our current official plan with what is being proposed. So you can see if there's any changes that are being proposed for your property. So just to give you an idea of the comments we've received to date. So I'm not going to list and go through each one, but just to give you an idea, we've received comments from a number of agencies and local municipalities, the province. Some municipalities have submitted comments. We've received comments from the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority, the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, and Grey Sauble. We've received comments from the Source Protection Authority, the Greybush Health Unit, as well as Wellington County. And we suspect that we'll receive more to date, or more comments from local municipalities as well. We've also received a number of comments from members of the public, developers, and businesses. And this is going to give you a list of the comments that were received from folks. Blue Mountain Resorts has submitted comments, Duncap, Castle Glen, Griffith Island, Merlin Von Johnston, Blue Mountain Watershed Trust Foundation, Questa Planning Consultants, Ann Creta, Edith Galloway, Charlene Winger, Windfall, on behalf of Colin Travis, Hank Gassenbeek, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing names wrong, Lynn Sullivan, Harold Sullivan Construction, and the list goes on as you can see it there. So quite a number of written comments already received. We're receiving the comments right up to this afternoon in terms of the list that you see here. And like I said, we suspect that we'll receive more comments even after the public meeting, which is fantastic. We've also met with a number of folks. So we held a couple weeks where we met with people face-to-face, had face-to-face discussions with folks. We met with all the local municipalities. So you see them on the list. We've met with the Niagara Escarpment Commission, as well as members of the public. So we met with folks like Edith Galloway, Merlin Von Johnston, Charlene Winger, Duncap, some consultants, Blue Mountain Resorts, Cobble Beach, H-By Construction, Blue Mountain Watershed Trust, Questa Planning Consultants, Greybush Health Unit. You can see there are quite a number of people that we've met with face-to-face, which we greatly appreciate them taking the time out of their schedules to meet with us to provide some comments and feedback on the official plan. It's just been quite valuable for us. We've also had at the open house at least 60 plus people at the open house. Here's some names that some individuals we met with at the open houses as well. And that doesn't include some of the councillors and municipal staff that were also in attendance for that open house and we've had discussions with. So quite a number of conversations on the draft official plan, which will shape what revisions will be brought forward to council based on the comments we've heard to date. So now we're going to give you an overview of the comments received. And like Scott said, we hope to hear more comments tonight from folks that are here in attendance. So what we'll do is, what we're going to be doing following tonight's public meeting is summarizing all the comments and provide those to council. So if you didn't see your name up there, please note that your comments will be heard, will be listed, will be summarized, and will be provided to council at some point following tonight's public meeting. Not all the comments received can be addressed. And so I just want to stress that. Some are outside of the scope of an official plan. Some comments were received conflict with one another. So it would be important to, in those cases, come up with a balanced approach. But not all the comments we've received will be able to be addressed in this official plan. Some will. And we'll be going through those comments and be recommending revisions to council based on what we have heard. Following that, council will then decide what revisions to adopt. And then following council's adoption, the province will then approve the plan. And I just want to note for folks in attendance tonight, based on recent changes to the Planning Act, the province's decision on the official plan cannot be appealed. So I just wanted to clarify that piece. So what we'll do now is just go through some of the sections, some of the comments, and again, these are just highlights. So if you don't see your comment up here, please note that it will be heard, it will be summarized, we will consider it. But we just want to touch on the highlights because we really want to get to the comments from the folks tonight. So given the changes to the Planning Act and the importance provided to official plans, it's going to be important to ensure the policies are as clear and directive as possible to reduce implementation issues and conflicting interpretations. So we need to look at words where we use must, will, and shall, and may, should, and encourage, and using consistent terminology in terms of when we're using those words. And then using, also explaining how we interpret those words in the official plan. We need to emphasize the economic importance of tourism and recreation in Grey County in the vision and principles section, which is at the beginning of the official plan document. We also need to emphasize the importance of people, employers, and employees in the vision and principles section, because without people and without employers and employees, we wouldn't have a community. We need to update our growth projection tables using the 2016 census data being completed by Hempson Consulting. We need to consider how we monitor these policies going forward. So it's important that we review the monitoring section to ensure that we will be able to measure the effectiveness of the policies that the province will eventually approve. To make sure that those policies are actually responding to what we're wanting to achieve. We need to include the Niagara Escarpment Plan information in the Understanding Our Plan section of the official plan. We need to include things like noise, vibration, and odor studies as potential study requirements in the complete application section of the plan. We've heard a number of comments been provided about clarifying terms, adding in definitions of terms, so we'll be taking a look at that as well. We've had several comments been provided about Crown patents, indicating if there is a Crown patent in relation to land, that the Crown patent supersedes any provincial legislation and municipal documents, such as zoning bylaws and official plans. The province has provided some case law to the county, which indicates that it's not reasonable to suggest that the presence of a Crown patent in relation to land negates the application of provincial laws regulating land uses such as the Planning Act. Huron County has also provided a legal opinion they sought regarding this topic, which also indicates that Crown patents do not prevent a municipality from regulating land use on private property through zoning bylaws and official plans. Now I'll turn it back over to Scott for Cultivate Grey.
So for those waiting for their turn to speak, we are over halfway done our presentation. We're actually closer to 2/3, so we apologize for the length, but there's a lot of important stuff in here. With respect to Cultivate Grey, we heard a lot of comments on this section. By land mass, this is a very important section of the plan because we have so much in the way of farming and resource lands. There were some comments from the province that we need to clarify some of our terminology just to make sure that it doesn't conflict with provincial documents, including the terms farm use and non-farm use and agricultural use. Unless we really stress what these mean, they can mean different things to different people. We also need to clarify some of the policies around minimum distance separation formula to note that the setbacks will apply to any new lots created after March 1st, 2017. And so these would be the setbacks from a new house to a barn, for example, or from a barn to a house. We need to clarify some of the permitted uses in our agricultural areas. We need to look at the size limits for those on-farm businesses that I spoke about earlier to make sure that they meet with the province's guidelines. We also need to clarify when you might consider excluding land from either the agricultural or special agricultural land use types based on some direction we get from the province. We want to clarify how Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change guidelines are applied in our rural and agricultural areas. We also need to add in some permissions that I talked about earlier with respect to severing the on-farm businesses. And we've heard a lot of comments about whether or not inns or motels or businesses of that nature should be allowed in the rural land use type. And there have been some concerns that they could conflict with farm uses or could conflict with other uses across the countryside. With respect to the rural severance policies, this is one of those areas that Randy spoke of earlier where we're not going to be able to satisfy every comment we've heard in this regard. We've heard some people say we need far less rural severances, and other people say we need to be more flexible and allow for more. We've also had some questions raised with respect to how conservation lots are counted across our countryside. Similarly, in the aggregate section, we've definitely heard comments on both sides of the fence as well. We've heard some comments that we need to provide more direction where we have our aggregate haul routes and what potential cost sharing might look like if someone was looking at a new pit or quarry and there were upgrades needed to a road. There's been some comments to suggest that we need to beef up our standards, if you will, with respect to new pit or quarry applications, to require things like agricultural impact assessments or karst studies where we have fractured bedrock, and also to clarify that progressive rehabilitation is in fact needed. There have been some comments from members of the public that believe that their land shouldn't be included in the aggregate mapping, and in some cases people have pointed out areas where there already were pits on the property. Those pits have been finished and rehabilitated, and therefore there's no resource left. We've gotten questions about clarifying the lot creation policies within these aggregate areas. And we've also received some comments that we need to map our bedrock resources as well as provide policies in that regard. The province has also noted that there may be some concerns with respect to the cumulative impact analysis that we're looking at requiring for multiple pit or quarry operations with respect to provincial policy in that regard. The natural grey section is also a section that people have been very vocal about, both in support of and with concern. The Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has suggested that we should be considering allowing for new pit or quarry operations within our core areas. There's been some clarification around what the buffer lands should be on fish habitat, and the province has noted that they should in fact be 120 meters. And perhaps one of the largest areas of comments has been around our cores and our linkages. Especially where those linkages pass through farmlands. There's been some question and some concern. People want to see the policy clarified there, and in some cases the mapping changed there. People have also had concerns about what this mapping might do and how it may impact their property in terms of future development purposes, or even how it may impact farms or existing development. They want to see some clarification around environmental impact studies, as I talked about earlier, in the scoped environmental impact studies. As Randy noted earlier, we have been looking at getting our updates to our hazard land mapping from each of our 4 conservation authorities, and we've heard some comments from members of the public on that. We've also heard comments from members of the public and the development industry on some of the wetland mapping, and we heard another comment here tonight that some of that wetland mapping may not be accurate, so we want to review that. There's also been some concerns with respect to drainage and the amount of tile drainage that's been occurring, especially in the south of our county, and who oversees tile drainage in this regard. We wanted to look at adding in a policy based on some concerns, which provides for some exemptions where we have existing approved development from some of the environmental features mapping. We've heard from the province that maybe we should consider adding further environmental mapping in the form of deer wintering yards to our plan. Similarly, we've heard the opposite from some members of public and even some members of council, that deer wintering yards may provide further restriction and may be difficult to ever really map based on the fact that deer aren't stationary and could choose to winter in different areas just as we do. We've heard policies around clarifying the difference between a woodland when in fact it's a man-made plantation versus more of a natural woodland. As I said, there's been general concern about the impact of environmental features on private property. We've got some good comments on our karst mapping, including a new mapping source there, as well as rewording the karst policies to recognize both the importance and the potential impacts that stem from this geologic feature. As I said, we are looking at implementing some very broad climate change policies, and we hope these policies will be further informed by a future climate change action plan the county is looking at. And finally, we've heard comments from the province that we need to consider mapping our hazardous forest types, and for those that might not be aware, hazardous forest types would be those forest types that could be most prone to a forest fire in the future. And where we have some of those forest types, it might be prudent to look at setbacks to development such that we protect both property and human safety in that regard. With that, I'll turn it back over to Stephanie.
So with respect to Develop Grey, we received a lot of wonderful comments. So one of the comments received from the province was to remove specific reference to identifiable non-Indigenous groups. So for example, we've used Mennonite manufacturing as a terminology in our plan, and they had recommended to replace with communities reliant on horse and buggy. As well, we want to consider wording that speaks to the impact on shoreline for tourist-related recreational development. As certainly many people know, the Grey County in certain areas are, very desirable tourist recreational areas, and we need to make sure that we are protecting these areas. Also, we've received comments to potentially add a policy to recognize the need to potentially reallocate development lands if current lands are not developable. So for instance, if a current property is in a settlement area and it's being inundated by water and it's now more susceptible to flooding for some reason, these lands may be better reallocated in a certain other part of the settlement whereby someone can, put a house on the property without potentially being damaged by flooding. As well, we received comments to potentially reassess certain settlement area designations and boundaries, for example, Big Bay, Oxenden, Jackson, Hanover, Dundalk, and Con. As well, to modify MDS formula policies to not apply within settlement areas, We've also received further comments to make sure that we're defining our terms that we're using in our plan. So for example, to further define compatible development, what does that mean? As well to define medium and high density development in the plan. With respect to Live Grey, we've received various comments. We've looking to highlight the cultural heritage value and the likely requirement for unique accessibility plans to ensure if there are any alterations or renovations of a certain property, it's not affecting the heritage attributes of the property. So in order to comply with ODA standards, if someone were to be renovating, we need to make sure the heritage features are being preserved. As well, add language that encourages local municipalities to share the healthy development checklist as part of the municipal application process. This checklist was created in collaboration with the Grey Bruce Public Health team, and currently the county we're currently distributing this to developers in the area, and we're hoping to share this with municipal planners as well. We want to consider including definitions that differentiate between affordable and attainable housing, as well expand social housing suppliers to encompass not simply Grey County, but for not-for-profits, private companies, etc. As well, encourage secondary unit development over garden suite development in settlement areas. Secondary unit development, they are more permanent structures when in comparison to garden suites, and this is more desirable from the county's perspective. As well, we want to add additional wording that protects the cultural heritage value of our assets within the county, incorporate some language that defines a duty to consult process within Grey County. This is something that we're hoping to further develop in collaboration with the Saugeen Ojibwe First Nations group. As well, expand various sections of the plan to further include Saugeen Ojibwe First Nations cultural influence in the area. As well, for applications below the high water mark of any body of water, the county should require a marine archaeological assessment to be conducted. And as well, include some wording about tiny home development in reference to the updates that are pending for the Ontario Building Code. Pass it on to Randy.
We are nearing the end. We thank you for everyone's patience, but as Scott indicated, we've received a number of comments, and we just want to make sure that we're providing the highlights of those comments that we've received today, because the people have taken time out of their schedules to either write to us or to meet with us face-to-face, which is fantastic. Some other comments we received specifically as it relates to the Move Grey section. Active transportation. Right now in our policies, we identify some other seasonal activities. We need to identify some other seasonal activities beyond winter activities. So right now our focus is on winter activities in our draft policies. People want to see more than just the winter activities, because we are a four seasons destination for sure. We need to ensure that the airport-related uses provided in the airport policies are truly airport-related. We've also heard comments about the importance of developing wayfinding signage for pedestrians, tourism attractions, and cultural attractions. We've had questions about whether it's possible to identify trucking routes and encouraging trucking routes to be located outside of downtown core areas and in main streets. We've heard comments that we need to clarify our complete street policies and whether the policies are encouraging that every road be designed as a complete street or only certain roads. Just for everyone's awareness, complete streets are designed to accommodate a number of transportation options, everything from roads, sidewalks, paved shoulders, transit stops, etc. We also had comments about clarifying the policies as to whether all roads should be designed to accommodate those various uses, again, or just certain roads in new developments. We've heard comments about clarifying the policies with respect to private roads and whether these policies would apply to new lot creation as well as existing lots of record. Some municipalities allow for development on existing lots on private roads, subject to the completion of a registered agreement addressing servicing levels. And the comments that we've heard is we need a consistent, strong approach when it comes to this. We've heard concerns expressed about the policy encouraging local municipalities to work together to provide sanitary, sewer, and municipal water services to development by extending those services to neighboring municipalities. The concerns expressed that this may be difficult to implement, that there is a lack of control over what development might occur in the future once services are extended. If service extensions are not possible or are not working for municipalities, then municipalities may need to explore other options, including municipal boundary changes. We need to clarify what is meant by other interim servicing measures for the policy that would consider temporary servicing measures for commercial industrial uses. And we need to clarify the partial servicing policies and what is meant by infilling and rounding out of development. We need to encourage settlement areas that are currently being serviced by partial services to explore opportunities to go to full municipal services. An example that's been provided is East Linton. We need to clarify the commercial water taking policies and where these policies would apply. For example, do these policies just apply to commercial water bottling, or do they apply to other commercial water taking, such as commercial recreational operations? We need to map and or include a policy regarding sewage treatment plants and setbacks from those plants. We need to consider including a recommended consultation process for telecommunication towers. The comments for the province, we need to map petroleum wells, so where they exist, and map those in our official plan. We've received a number of comments about the source protection policies, so we'll be reviewing those comments with our source protection authorities. And we've received comments from MTO, Ministry of Transportation, requesting that connecting links be shown on the various maps and to also identify patrol yards. We've also heard comments supporting the concept of complete streets and connecting links. We've had comments about ensuring that stormwater and drainage matters are being dealt with properly. We've heard comments about clarifying the reasons for paved shoulders, and it's just beyond cycling in terms of the benefits of having paved shoulders. And we also need to do further education on sharing the road for all. We've heard concerns about the proposed rail trail policies and how this may impact development in settlement areas. We need to be prepared for autonomous cars and vehicles if they were to be further introduced from a technology standpoint. We've heard support for functional classification of county roads, and we've also heard comments about encouraging live snow fencing where we are experiencing heavy drifting on our county roads, looking at live snow fencing, so planting of trees to prevent that drifting from occurring. So just want to give you an overview in terms of next steps. Just to recap, that's some of the highlights of the comments that we've received so far. As I mentioned, if you haven't heard your comment in that slide deck, please note that those are just some of the highlights. We will be considering all the comments received. What we plan for doing in terms of next steps, so any further comments or feedback will be collected, especially the comments that we received tonight as well. We'll be summarizing those comments and bringing those back to council. In April, we're going to be reviewing all those comments. We're going to be working on a revised draft official plan. And then in late May, we're going to be presenting an updated version of that official plan to Committee of the Whole. We will then post that revised official plan on our website, and we'll provide a 30-day review period for people to review that plan. We'll send out an email to those that are signed up on our list. We'll also promote it through social media, and we'll ask people to please review that, and if you have any further comments, send those to us. We'll take those comments, and then we'll present a final version of the official plan to council in July. Following council's adoption, that plan is then sent on to the province for their review and approval, and then we'll wait for the province's approval with respect to the official plan at that time. All this information, as well as this PowerPoint presentation, will be posted on our website. So please, if you didn't take any notes or if you missed some certain things, we'll be posting this presentation on our website. Please give us a call, send us an email. We're happy to answer any questions or comments at any time. This is a timeline which has also been updated on our website. It gives you an idea in terms of where we're at in the process and what are the next steps. And now we come to the public portion of the meeting tonight in terms of getting comments and questions from members of the public. So as the warden indicated, please come up to the podium. Please state your name and address so that it can be recorded in the minutes. And I'll turn over to you, Mr. Warden, to...
Thank you, Randy. Will we be answering any questions or just receiving questions?
In some cases, we'll try and answer some questions, but in some cases, receiving questions and maybe getting back to folks or posting response to those questions at some point. So
that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. All right. Sorry, it isn't. Yeah, it's public, but at the end, we can take some council questions as well. All right, who's going to start it off? Anybody wanting to make comments, come up to the podium, state your name and address so that Heather can capture that information. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Lynn Silverton from Grey Highlands. I'm also on. Lynn Silverton from Grey Highlands, RR1 Flesherton, NOC1EO. I was happy to see that you included something about tiny housing, but I think that this should not be dropped. It should continue to be looked into and worked on because there are some very interested people in that. And I am also grateful that you heard my concern about tree farms when it came to the agricultural section. I'm asking, one of the other things is the size of your designated agriculture. And there are specialty farmers who don't need 100 acres or 50 acres or 25 acres. Specialty farming could work on 20 acres or 10. So maybe that should be looked at because there's a lot more specialty farming. And I'm not talking about with critters, I'm talking about with food. Regarding the Mennonite manufacturing comment that was received by county, they're reliant on trucks bringing the raw materials in, and they're reliant on trucks taking the raw material out. So I don't think it should be changed to reliant on horse and buggy. It's just a little thing, but when you think about it, the roads are the ones that we have to look at. Source protection signs as well. I've noticed the province has some up. I haven't noticed any of our municipal ones or the county ones, but the signs simply say source protection area, and I have been asked as a member of council what that means. So perhaps it should say public water well protection. We know what source protection is because we deal with it, but the general public, they don't need to know about it other than the rules and regulations. And I'd like to thank staff and county for putting on all these meetings. I am absolutely amazed at the content of tonight's presentation, and I can't think of anything other than what I've suggested that have been missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Silverton. Who's next? Welcome.
Roberta Doherty from Meaford. I just have 3 things that people have asked me about. I'm seeing there's still a lot of fear about the NEC coming in and taking over the land. If you could clarify that for people, whether we still have something to worry about or whether that's settled. And I once tried to register my land for if I found any treasures, whatever, under the land, and I couldn't find anybody to discuss it with. There didn't seem to be any rule that if I found something, somebody else couldn't come in and claim it. And if someone was to find something on their land that Indigenous people say, wait a minute, that's mine, can you clarify in the plan, what do you do? Who's got any rights? Okay,
Thank you for that.
thanks a bunch.
I'm Bob Weirmeyer from West Gray. I just got a couple little comments here. You talked about getting a legal statement from Huron County. That was actually in response to a questionnaire the people down there had put out. I read that too, and the legal opinion didn't address anything that the questions were on the original sheet. So I just question actually using that.
Thank you for that. Any other comments?
Yeah, I've been looking at some of the mapping that's been done, and what happens when you find it's wrong? I talked to somebody at one of the open houses, and we went through a couple little places, and I could point out right where it's wrong. Now, once all this mapping goes through and everything is in place, what does that do to the property owner? Does he have to prove he is right? Or what's the cost on this? Is there environmental studies? Who pays for that? It's a big question, because I just looked at one map, and I could point out 3 or 4 spots just on one map, and there is quite a few maps. It's going to be very detrimental to the property owner to have to prove that what he had all along is still there.
Those are good comments, and I think, you know, if you have anything that you want to point out tonight, certainly our staff, you know, would be certainly willing to talk to you, but there is a process, you know, to give them a call, and they certainly would welcome your call. So
Yeah.
they're open and transparent, so.
The problem is I just looked at one map in one area, and it's a big county, and there was a lot of maps.
So this was your own personal area you were looking at?
Yeah, roughly, you know, within 5 miles.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a big concern on what happens when 2 years down the road, that when somebody all of a sudden wants to do something, and we'll know the mapping says you can't do this, there's a restriction, it's a designated area. A lot of people don't have the chance to look at this, or don't see the need to, because they know what it's like. Now all of a sudden 2 years down the road, down the road, we're into this problem, and where do we go from there? It's not fair for the property owner to all of a sudden face those kind of costs.
I understand that comment, and Randy will, maybe, Randy, you want to comment on that now?
I did have a good discussion with Bob at one of the open houses. I did make some notes in terms of some of the linkages that need to be clarified. So those are some of the comments that we have heard from folks, is looking at revising some of that linkage mapping. So we are going to take another look at that and make some recommended revisions to some of that linkage mapping based on the comments we have heard.
Thank you for commenting, Bob, and thank you, Randy, for giving us some answers tonight.
Is there some way of putting something in the official plan that, so people aren't going to be restricted or having to pay to get this changed, because they aren't going to see it until they really need it? This is something that maybe should be addressed in there at the same time.
Well, Heather's taking notes, so
Okay.
we'll deal with, I can't give you an answer right tonight, but it's certainly a good question. Thanks, Bob. Yes, Randy?
Just to further clarify, some of the maps that are at the back of the room, those are the original draft maps that we posted since November.
Right.
So we've had lots of discussions since then with folks. We've made some notes in terms of what revisions need to be made to some of those maps. So we'll be coming back with some revised mapping. Again, we'll post that on our website once that is available. We expect that will be towards the end of May, June. For some revised mapping, so I guess stay tuned. So the maps that are at the back here, those are the original maps. We haven't made any revisions yet, but we have received comments about some revisions, and we'll be considering those and making recommendations to council.
So everybody in the rural area really should be looking at our maps, and
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we have the interactive GIS site developed, and we've encouraged people to just get in contact with us. We can look at each person's property specifically, as well as any mapping that they're interested in, and zoom right down into their property level to see if there's any changes being proposed.
Well, I'm sure our Director of Communications will make sure that we get that out to the public. Thanks for that. Anybody else would like to comment? Come on up, sir. Good evening.
Charles McGilvery, a landowner, Grey County. Now, the Saugatuck Valley Conservation
Any
Area.
municipality?
Pardon?
Do you have a municipality that you live in Grey County? Just
Yeah, I think it's around Markdale.
around Markdale? Okay, Grey Highlands.
Grey Highlands, yeah.
Or it could be West Grey.
Pardon?
Could be West Grey or Grey Highlands.
Well, it's 50-50. It's gray and it's wet. Okay. Now, the Saugatuck Valley Conservation Authority,
Yes.
they pull a lot of weight here, okay? Now, are they going to override this? Because they override the MTO. Anything you want to get done along Highway 10, it's got to go through the Saugatuck Valley Conservation Area. They override the municipality. They override the MBO. They got to get the decision from them before they can make a decision. Now, how's this going to work? We're going to get a set of maps made out by Grey County, and we're going to get another set of maps made out by the Saugatuck Valley Conservation Area. Now, who's going to rule?
Well, Randy did make a comment earlier that we're going to be taking the Saugatuck and all the conservation maps into our mapping, so their current mapping will be put into our mapping, so
So they'll pretty well be the same.
it should be.
Well, who's going to rule? If you want to get some work done, are you going to go to Grey County, or are you going to go to over to Formosa?
I think there's a combination, depends on what the situation is, sir, so Randy can give you more specifics on that, but
Okay, I agree with, I can appeal this and I can dispute it, but the thing is, with the conservation area, they're pretty hard to get along with, eh?
oh, they're much better now.
They're much better now, are they?
Yeah, the last couple of years, yes.
Oh my God, you mean they could have been worse? Listen, you got 50 acres of land, okay, there's a creek running through it. You
Right.
got 100 meters on this side, you got 100 meters on the other side, that's 600 feet of your land going. I'm paying taxes on it. Okay, who's going to help me out? The land's not worth anything. I can't build a picnic table on that land. Now
Okay.
think about it.
Yeah, well, I agree. I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but Randy, do you want to
Well, it's
comment on
true, because I
picnic
can prove it,
tables?
I got the papers on it. It's the way it is.
Okay, so
Taxes keep going up and our rights keep going down.
Randy's will make some
Yeah,
comments on that.
Well,
100
I'll be getting a letter off I'm going to get my lawyer and get a letter off and see if I can get some answers. And I'd like to get some official answers that'll stand up in court, because there's been a lot of talk of a class action lawsuit coming. The farmers and the people are getting fed up.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Randy, do you want to comment on the 100-meter setbacks at all? Or?
Yeah, so I think what is being described is as what's called the regulated areas for the Conservation Authority. So the Conservation Authority does have some mapping. It's called the regulated area mapping. Any development within those regulated areas requires a permit from the Conservation Authority. Like you indicated, Warden Halliday, it all depends on what is being proposed, whether or not it triggers a permit or not. If you're within that regulated area, and that mapping is on our website, it's not being incorporated into this official plan. What we are proposing to incorporate is what we call our hazard lands. So these are areas that are prone to flooding. So we will be updating that mapping with the most up-to-date hazard land mapping from the conservation authorities. But there is a setback to those hazard lands, which is what we call the regulated area, which, like I said, it sometimes requires a permit for any development within that regulated area.
But we're pro-picnics, right?
From what I understand, if it's a picnic table that can be moved around, I'm pretty sure it can be placed anywhere. But don't quote me on that.
Thank you. Thanks for those comments. Who's up next? Good evening.
Eric Cooney, West Grey. There was just a comment made about the land patent, and I'm just curious.
Patents, yes.
Do you not recognize that at all, or you said you talked to your
Randy?
legal people about that, or could you just come out bluntly and say how you feel about it.
So we have heard from the province. They have shared some previous case law with respect to crown patents. Basically, what the case law indicates is that that the province has shared with us is that crown patents don't prevent municipalities from regulating land use. So coming up with official plans or zoning bylaws on private land. So that's what we've heard from the province, and there was a court case that went through, and I can't remember the exact name of that court case off the top of my head right now, but there was a court case that was shared by the province indicating that municipalities still have the ability to regulate land use on private property.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'd like to know what court case that is, and I'll find it out, I guess. If there's
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
I
we
do
have-
believe there's
We
ones
have your
there
notes
that-
here. Yeah.
Pardon me?
We're making notes of your
I
comments.
do
and-
believe there's ones where they have taken on the crown patent and it has won. I would still have to just go out and say that when the crown gave this land, and I have my crown patent, for example.
Right.
And nowhere on that crown patent does it say the municipality or the county has the right to tell me what to do or not to do on my property. Nowhere on that crown patent does it say you guys paid my mortgage or have ownership whatsoever. So I'm just going to say that if it ever comes to that, I think we're going to have a battle on our hands if that's the attitude you guys are taking.
But we understand where you're coming from, so, and we'll comment on that later on. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else like to make some comments? Don't rush all at once, but we certainly welcome comments. It helps shape our official plan.
Rick Butler's my name. I'm from Grey Highlands.
Rick?
Road 55, 554029.
Okay.
I have one concern, and it has to do with your core areas and your encumbrances, okay? Basically, what you're doing is you're designating areas, be they environmental areas, whatever, okay? You are restricting developments on these pieces of property to the point where you probably couldn't even build a house on them, or a barn, or whatever. Sorry about that, sir. And if you want to challenge that or build get a building permit, basically nowadays you might as well just go to the Conservation Authority. You have to pay their fees, get their approval before you even get a building permit from the municipality. And when you go to do that, they're going to say, well, wait a minute, you're in this area, you're not getting one unless you do an environmental study. Now, you've designated all these areas. You've put encumbrances on the properties, which whether they're legal or not, I won't argue that.
Right.
So these encumbrances on properties have, I'm going to say, are for the benefit of all the people in Grey County, probably all of the province. That's what they're for. And then you tell that person, wait a minute, you've got to get an environmental impact study, which you've got to pay for, by the way, sir. Wait a minute, that's not fair. If you're going to put encumbrances on the property and ask for environmental studies, which, you know, the last time I looked, you might as well give a blank check to most environmental engineers. You know, I'm sorry, I can't afford it. Most people in this county couldn't afford it. Maybe the odd developer could afford it. What I'm saying is, if you're going to put these encumbrances on the properties where there are, you know, there's 100 acres with no house on it, and the guy wants to build a house, hey, and he's got to pay for an environmental study. Wait a minute, everybody should pay for that. Should be part of their. The bill should go to the municipality or the county, whoever made all this up, and it gets paid that way. Maybe if the guy doesn't build, you get it back off him. But I'm sorry, if the benefit is to all people, then all people should pay. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Randy, you said you were looking at some of these concepts of linkages and checklists and things, so.
Yeah, as Scott indicated in the natural gas slides, we have received a lot of comments on the cores and linkages.
Right.
So we have to go back and take a look at some of those policies, whether or not we've achieved that right balance or not, as well as looking at our environmental impact study policies and whether or not in some cases, an environmental impact study may not be required. So we want to take a look at some of those policies again, as well as the mapping for the core areas and linkages.
Are we looking at checklists as a?
Yeah, there has been comments about looking at checklists and seeing if there's other opportunities to help make that process easier
Right.
when it comes to environmental impact studies. So we'll be taking a look at that as well.
Or you're still shaping it then?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Okay, who's up next? Are we drawing? There, somebody's coming. Great. Take a number. Come on up.
Gerald Carefoot from Greyhounds.
Thank you, Gerald.
Number 10 Highway. I just want to make sure, is it 200 feet, 200 meters total, or is it 200 meters on each side of the river? The way it looks back there on each side of the river, I just want a clarification of that. Can you tell me that now, or? It seems as if it's following the river, and my concern, I have 50 acres. I have 150 acres on the one property, but 100 acres and there's another 50. And if this goes through, it basically takes the whole 50 acres. And that's just my concern. What, if it's 200 meters on each side of the river, why does it have to be 200 meters? What's it for? Is it for wildlife? So why does wildlife need 200 meters on each side of the river? Like, I appreciate all the work that you have done. You've done a lot of work. I'm not against you. I'm just saying, why 200 meters?
Want to update that, Randy?
So the 200 meters was recommended by the consultant in our green and gray study, and it's based on that natural corridor in terms of providing opportunities of movement for wildlife and linkages in between those core areas. For the most part, they do follow rivers and streams. Some they don't. And the ones that don't, we want to revisit based on some of the comments we've heard. Because some of the comments we've heard is that we may not have those linkages in the right locations. Or maybe we should move some of those linkages based on some of the comments we've heard because they see some more movement of wildlife in other locations, not the location that we have identified. So we want to take another look at those linkages. And if you have any feedback or comments about those, locations of those, we're more than happy to hear those comments for sure.
Will you be able to hunt? Like when hunting season's on, can you still hunt in those areas?
Yeah, there's basically if as long as you can hunt in terms of regular hunting seasons and if you have the you know, if it's your property, obviously yes. If it's another property, you need to get their permission, obviously. But there's no restrictions with respect to hunting within those areas.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll get more clarification as we move forward on that. Yes, who's next? Welcome.
Hi, I'm David Ellingwood, representing Cresta Planning Consultants in Owen Sound here.
All right.
I just wanted to reiterate some of the comments that we've made in writing and through in-person meetings with the county planning staff. Planner Taylor has noted some of these comments in remarks on the screen here a little while ago, but just wanted to present some of those in front of the committee tonight. So the one area we're looking at quite a bit is the rural and agricultural areas within the county, and that's the bulk of my comments related to some policy points for those areas. There are permitted use guidelines that have come out. We believe that when you're reviewing on-farm diversified uses, those permitted use guidelines should be the ones that are used to make that review. We feel that it will provide a more flexible approach than some of the proposed wording that's currently in policy 321C. For surplus farm dwellings, we think some clarification should be made in the policies that MDS applies only if the dwelling is going to be on the same lot as the livestock facility. If that livestock facility is not going to be in the severed lands, then you would apply it. Also, MDS should apply to vacant non-farm properties where a new sensitive receptor could be developed. And in those cases, you could still get a minor variance to allow that development. But that would provide a mechanism for undertaking an appropriate review of its impact on that agricultural operation nearby. In rural and agricultural areas where there's industrial uses being considered, often the D6 guideline from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change is being used to evaluate those development proposals. We believe that you should consider the distance to the neighboring structures, such as like a residential dwelling, and the appropriate side yard, rear yard setbacks from that, rather than looking at the lot line, because the lot line on some rural parcels, you could be 100 meters away, and you would far exceed what you're trying to do with the D6 guideline application and trying to keep that industrial use an appropriate distance from the neighboring residential. You could have double or triple the necessary setback applied in that situation. For lot additions, we think in 323 section 3, there should be a little clarity that non-farm lot additions, taking land from a non-farm lot and adding it to a farm lot should be allowed in all situations. And then on the kind of flip side, having a cautious approach when reviewing lot additions coming from, say, an agricultural area to a non-farm lot out in a rural setting. And the purpose there, trying to make sure that we're avoiding fragmentation of the farmland or woodlands, wetlands in those rural settings. There is surplus farm dwelling policies. In aggregate areas, we believe that surplus farm dwelling severances should be allowed even in a primary aggregate resource area. This is addressed in 362 section 6. And the reason we believe this is because under the Aggregate Resources Act, that existing dwelling is treated the same when you're doing studies for noise and dust and other impacts of a potential aggregate operation, whether that dwelling is on a separate property or on the site where the aggregate operation would be. It's going to be treated the same. So allowing that surplus farm dwelling severance in that instance allows the farmer to make appropriate use or retirement plan for his property, and doesn't have any undue impact on a potential aggregate operation down the road.
Could I interject at this point?
Sure.
Have you, you have made this presentation to our staff, and you're just trying to give us a heads up on what you've presented to staff?
That's correct, Mr. Ward.
Okay. Is it? Okay. So it's not going to go on forever?
No, sir, it's not. Basically coming down actually to some of the last points here. There's a lot of vacant lots out in the countryside of Grey County in all municipalities. As a suggestion, with provincial policy statement, we try to get development directed to settlement areas. Back in one of the previous official plan reviews, a lot of the tertiary settlement areas were done away with. And so we believe that it would be wise to reconsider that approach. So some of the little hamlets and crossroads, Jackson and Massey and other places, that have a sense of community, a historic places where development has occurred. There's existing clusters of homes where the potential to provide some service on a concentrated basis is there, that those areas be reinstated to some degree within this current official plan review as what are now called secondary settlement areas. And that will allow an opportunity for small growth around the edges of those existing communities, and to balance the potential for development and servicing of those areas, we would suggest that in the rural areas, the consideration for the number of severances allowed on a rural lot be reduced. So you'd have the 1+ retained on a 40 hectare crown lot. And you could also take a look at the quality of the severance being proposed. So not every severance would be necessarily allowed or considered. You look at the type of road access, utilities, and other factors, nearby land uses. And in that way, you could create useful non-farm lots out in the rural areas that have good potential for development and a quality of life. And you also would then direct more of your settlement and development into these former tertiary locations. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for that. Randy, you've taken all this is not new information then to you?
No, we've met with Cuesta, and we've also received comments in writing from Cuesta, and yeah, so we'll be summarizing those comments as well and bring them forward to council. Yeah.
Thanks for that information. All right, who's up next? Come on up. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And thanks for staff putting that report together. My name is Hugh Simpson. I'm from Feversham. I farm there. I'm also on the board of the Grey County Federation of Agriculture. We represent about 1,500 farm families in Grey County. Farming and farmers have a long history with Grey County. It runs deep, and the current economics of Grey County are very much tied to agriculture. We've heard some comments from landowners this evening. I think some of them farm. I think many who come to Grey County come here to spend money either part-time or they're going to come here to live, and in part because they appreciate the agricultural environment, the history of agriculture in this area. What I'm hoping, and I didn't see it, and it may exist, and I haven't found it yet, is that within the vision for Grey County, there's a strategic statement made about the importance of agriculture to the current Grey County and the future Grey County. It's my personal view, and I think it's held by most of my colleagues on the board of Grey County and most farmers, that if there's not a statement made strategically at county level that we value and appreciate and nurture and intend to preserve and develop modern agriculture, that over time, by way of consultants or the influence of provincial politics or otherwise, the rights and really the economics and eventually the presence of farmers will eventually wane in our area, and will become sort of another color of the GTA. So it's not a question, Your Honor. It's a statement that I hope will be taken into consideration.
Have you sent that in, Hugh, to Randy directly?
No, I can. I'm just making the statement now.
Okay, so, well, Heather's captured it, so, and I'm not sure what the vision is, but certainly agriculture is very important, so
Good.
I'm sure that it'll be addressed.
Good, I hope so, thanks.
Thank you. Next. Welcome.
Good evening, Council. My name's Corey Chisholm. I'm here with MHBC Planning, and tonight I'm here on behalf of our clients, Flato Developments. As you may know, Flato Developments holds a number of land holdings in the community of Dundalk. We've previously submitted a letter to staff with a number of comments. There's just three I would like to touch on this evening.
Okay.
The first is in regards to the policy about redefining the hazard land boundary. It's a small wording change, however, it could potentially have a large impact. Currently, it's allowed to permit minor redefining of the hazard lands designation without the need for a county official plan amendment. We've requested that the term minor be removed from this policy. Minor is a subjective term and can be tough to differentiate. Currently, the hazard lands is identified with a broad brush approach. So usually it's a more conservative map, and then when a specific development application comes in through an EIS, we refine that. We submit that through the typical process of conducting an EIS, and typically through a zoning amendment, the hazard lands boundary is further refined to the accurate boundary. Requiring to do a county OPA and potentially a local OPA to change its designation could be a large encumbrance on landowners. The second point I would like to address is in regards to significant woodlands. So the significant woodlands policies, we believe, should not apply within settlement areas. There's a vast land area within the County of Grey with agricultural and environmental lands that are protected. Within the settlement areas, we believe the function of settlement areas, which is where the majority of development should be directed, should apply. For example, agricultural lands are strictly protected outside of settlement areas across the county. However, within settlement areas, if there's an existing agricultural piece, it is allowed to be developed. We believe the same standard should apply to the significant woodlands. And this would be, this has also been reflected in recent mapping released by the province, where their natural heritage system maps and their agricultural system maps apply across southern Ontario, however, not within settlement areas. The third policy, which Randy briefly mentioned earlier, is in relation to the reintroduction of rail use on the CP Rail Trail. So as the policy is currently worded, it contemplates planning for the future reintroduction of the rail line along this rail trail. However, it's our experience that planning for development adjacent to an active rail line is a huge encumbrance, very large setbacks, potential to require large crash berms, greater standards for construction, for noise proofing. We submit that to require these sort of requirements now, when it's not known if the rail trail will eventually come, may not be appropriate at this time. The CP Rail Trail does go through a number of settlement areas, and this would also potentially create a large encumbrance for current landowners, as well as future development applications in those areas. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Randy, is that all new information or information you've heard before?
We have received written comments from Corey at MHBC on those matters, so we will be summarizing those and considering those in the revised official plan.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else would like to come up? Anybody else like to come up? Yeah, there we are. Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Vaughn Johnstone, and we are residents of Milton, but we have property in Grey County.
Thank you.
I've made several comments on the website, but I'll just address a couple of things that I've heard this evening. First of all, I want to comment on how patient and pleasant the planning staff have been throughout all of our discussions, and they've been very helpful.
Thank you for that compliment.
It's true. There was several people have been commenting on the land patent issue here, and I understand that there is a new case law which was mentioned tonight that I had not heard of, but the last one that we had submitted in our comments was a case presented in Newfoundland. It was called Lynch versus St. John's, where the city was using private land as an aquifer filter for city water. And to make short of the results, eventually the Supreme Court in Newfoundland decided that based on the Crown land patents, that the city did not have the right to restrict the use of the land for their purposes. And that was upheld by the Supreme Court when they would not rehear an appeal put forward by St. John's. So you folks may not be aware of that, but that's kind of the latest that we'd heard. There was a short discussion on hazard lands and river properties, and the gentleman before me asked about why we should pay for the environmental studies that are done or required after the fact. I guess the question I would have is if the studies haven't already been done adequately, why would they have placed hazard land designations on any property? You would think that would have been done before they put the designations on. Just going back to the Crown patent issue briefly, I would suggest to the council that they should ask the province to indemnify them in any court cases that may come forward based on poor advice that they gave to the county.
Thank you for
that. The last thing I was wanting to speak to was the fact that in 2016, the Grey County Council and then Warden Mr. Barfoot, they were, as I have said before, courageous enough to object to the NEP being expanded. And that was largely based on trying to defend the landowners' property values for tax revenues. And what I'm not hearing tonight is any policy that is trying to protect our land values and your tax base. So I'll leave it with that.
Okay, thank you. Randy, you got that comment? So. Okay, thanks. Thank you, sir. All right, we're still open for people to come up to the front. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth Hamilton from West Grey. And thank you for this opportunity to ask a question. And thank you to staff for providing so many opportunities to participate and engage. And I think you've done a great job communicating with the public. So thank you for that. Yeah. I just have a question about, in the official plans, 6.12, it points to the recreational trail master plan that I know we're still writing and creating, and we've had lots of opportunity to participate in that as well. So given the significant time and resources and public engagement in developing this recreational trails master plan, I'd like to see consideration for giving the recreational trail master plan more teeth by making it a binding document within the official plan instead of a guiding document. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Beth. Okay, we're still open for business, so anybody else like to come up? Randy, do you see anybody wanting to move our way? Hmm? No, that's right. We haven't bid anybody yet. We don't intend to. So. It's an easy open forum. So. Well, while we're waiting for the our public, perhaps there might be a few councillors that want to ask a few questions or go on the record with a question. So, first, what I see is Councillor Pringle.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Randy, on the mapping, I saw on, actually Scott pointed it out to me here, but on page 8, in the roundtable discussion at the last council meeting, we had comments in regard to the developing the road, possibly of a county road between Gray Road 40 all the way to Mennonite Corners. That's not identified on the map. Is there a reason for that?
So the maps are still the original maps that we posted on the website in November. So we haven't made any revisions to the map based on comments received to date. We have noted, though, that at the workshop, as well as through other discussions, that another potential county road corridor is the road you just mentioned. I think it's concession 5 in Derby Township. It's 6?
6 in Sullivan and
6 in Sullivan and
5
in Derby, which goes north-south from Gray Road 40 to connects to County Road 18. Right. So that is something that we will definitely be considering and potentially then identifying or recommending to be identified in Appendix D. So all the maps that are the back, as well as what's on our website, those are the original maps that we put up and presented to council back in November. So we haven't made any revisions yet to those maps. What we will see is revisions to those maps based on the comments that we have heard from November to now. So one of those comments, like you indicated, Councillor Pringle, is identifying that as a potential county road corridor. And we no doubt have seen an increase in traffic on that road. I've used that road personally in the past as almost a bypass around for that provincial highway corridor. So that's something that we can consider. So just to reiterate, these maps are just the original maps. We will be making revisions to those maps and be posting those on our website, which we anticipate will be posted end of May, early June. And we'll be asking for some further comments and revisions based on those maps.
Thank you. And I'm sure that council will be notified when those maps are up then.
Yeah, we'll be presenting to Committee of the Whole. We're hoping May 24th is the date. Yeah.
And we'll see those maps then. Thank you. All right, any other questions from council? Councillor McQueen.
Wish me to stand up or can I sit down?
You can do whatever you want there.
I'll try sitting down, just speak nice and loud. How's that go?
Yeah, get the mic in your...
A couple items, I guess, to Randy and planning staff. As we know, in 2009, the Green Energy Act came into play that took away the planning authority for renewable projects. If for any reason that gets changed, what do we do if we're silent on our official plan? Or do we do an amendment to then, if all of a sudden local authorities have the ability for a planning, say?
Through you, Mr. Warden, yeah, we would have to look at an amendment at that time to the official plan. So depending on if the province has approved this official plan by then, or if we're amending our current document, we would have to look at an amendment to our official plan. And thankfully, we have some existing policies and mapping and resources that we can rely on. There was a lot of work that was done in Grey Highlands at the time, developing some policies around that prior to the Green Energy Act. So say, for example, if the Green Energy Act were to be rescinded and to powers to be then returned back to local municipalities in the county, we would have to look at revising our plan at that time.
Is there a window that the plan can't be amended?
So technically, under the Planning Act, there is a 2-year freeze or a moratorium on any official plan amendments to this official plan, because this would be a new official plan once it's approved by the province. Right. However, that's voluntary, so council can still consider amendments to that official plan within that 2-year window. It would have to be done, council would have to pass a motion to allow for those amendments to be considered.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Second point. What's the requirements for the natural heritage study that we did? That was a requirement from the province, correct? And I'll just finish off so it was a requirement, and maybe this is good information for our public, that the requirement came from the province to do it. Were we obligated to adopt it?
Good question. So the provincial policy statement does identify a policy indicating that, that municipalities need to consider what's called natural heritage systems. So currently in our official plan, we have identified a number of natural heritage features. So these are individual features such as provincially significant wetlands, significant woodlands, areas of natural and scientific interest, for example. What the province has asked municipalities to look at throughout the entire province is how those features work together as a system. And that's what Green and Gray study did, was looking at all those features, how they're working together as a system, and identified what Scott termed earlier as our superstar, our core areas. These are the key building blocks of our natural heritage system, our natural environment in Grey County. So in some cases, those core areas, we're talking about 1,000 hectares or greater in some cases of natural environment, natural areas. The linkages are what's being recommended to link up those core areas. And like I said, most of those follow rivers and streams, some don't. For those that don't, we want to revisit some of those mapping to make sure we've got it correct based on some of the comments we have heard. But you're correct, Councillor McQueen, in that the original reason why we looked at a natural heritage system study is based on provincial policy statement.
Thank you for that.
No, I joked about it a couple years ago, moved to receive it, and I didn't get a seconder, so. Other question was brought up, Mr. Warden, just with regards to the expanded lands of the NEC. As being a commissioner on the NEC, basically every 10 years is a review of the NEC lands. Saying that, there is though provisions right now to revisit the green belt, which the NEC is part of. And as you're quite aware, Mr. Warden, you and I attended a workshop down in Guelph a month ago that at this time the areas around Grey County aren't really being looked upon at this time, certainly areas south of here, and they're doing study areas. Notwithstanding that, there is the ability for the province to still look at that at Greenbelt itself. So that hasn't been totally thrown out the window. But as far as expanding the NEC, it's basically every 10 years as they review the plan. So as Randy just said, it was adopted last June of 2017. So I don't know if I go, but anyway, right now they are looking still at the Greenbelt expansion lands, which is part of the NEC. So I'll leave it at that. The other thing is, I thought it was an interesting comment that was made that any policy that protects value and the tax base should be supported. I just thought that was a pretty interesting comment that was made just at the later part of there. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Ward.
Thank you for those comments. I'm moving around the table. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Barfoot.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I guess just a comment, I guess, more than anything. Usually planning matters end up to be a fairly dry discussion. For those of us that have been around for a while, there's lots of planning meetings where nobody shows up. So I congratulate Randy and the staff on the new approach that has been taken this time. When you see the turnout that we have tonight and the great questions that have come forward, I mean, that's democracy at its best. And by the way that it's been broke down, I think we've got engagement from everyone, from council and from the public on this. So I look forward to the next steps. I mean, there's been so many things, and we've talked about this at County Council before. There's been so many things brought forward. Not all of them are going to make the cut. So I look forward to when we start to condense and get down to the final document, because we do need to get this into the province this summer. For those that didn't realize, we've went through other ones, and if you don't get it in before the end of a council, then you start the process all over again. So we've had great involvement from everybody. I think we're getting close to having a document ready, so let's get it in this summer for the province to look at. So thanks, Randy, and your group.
Thank you, Councillor Barfoot. Of course, it started in 2016 under your reign, so you're the father of this concept. So we thank you for that, and we thank you for staff for working along these lines. This is totally new and revolutionary, and yet I think we're accomplishing some things here tonight. So, any other? Yes, Councillor Fosbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. There's been a lot of great comments, and I too appreciate the public stepping up and staff's initiative to get as much public engagement as we can. So I'll try to be brief. In my review of the draft official plan, I'd like to point out that the words public participation appear once and only in the context of secondary plans. So I'd like to focus my comments on that area. I have spoken with staff, and it is my view that where we're at, we have received comments, and at the next revision, we will receive comments. But I would like to see every written comment from the public and commenting agencies and the province all be made available publicly for the benefit of the public who are unable to attend meetings, and for the benefit of council who bear the burden of making decisions that I do believe legislation stipulates should be fully informed. So I do have a couple of other notes that I'd like to just sort of touch on. I believe that we have heard from the agricultural sector because we went out and said, you know what, this is really going to impact you. The individuals who live in the settlement areas may be under the impression that this isn't going to impact them as much. In that regard, I think that most constituents, residents, citizens, ratepayers, people, assume that we are going to put their health and safety and the long-term health of our water, land, and air as an utmost priority. And so I will be looking forward to the further revisions to this document. I would like to point out that I have concerns with accountability in the document. As an example, we have gravel pit operations that fall under the Aggregate Resources Act, but also fall under the Planning Act. And so I think it's very important that we all are clear on who is accountable for what, whose jurisdiction, and that we're all interpreting this document in the same manner. There's some stuff I'm made notes on, but I'm not going to address because it's been sufficiently addressed. And I will have future opportunities, and for that I appreciate that privilege. The mapping that we have, Randy talked about bedrock mapping, so that is yet to come, as I understand. I wonder, in the context of accuracy of mapping, it's been an ongoing discussion. Are we using the same mapping that other counties across the province are using? Are we all reading from the same song sheet? Just a question. And then, let me just take a look here. Yeah, I think that about covers it for now. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. Do you want to make any comments, Randy, to some of?
On the current aggregate mapping, so that's what we call our aggregate resource areas. Right. Those are only mapping our sand and gravel deposits currently. That was done through a study that was done back in 2004 called our Aggregate Resource Inventory Master Plan, which was an extensive document and study that mapped those areas. And use mapping from different resources, but some of the resources that other counties and municipalities utilize were used as part of that document and that study.
So bedrock, is that being studied? Or?
So bedrock, that's a comment that we received from the province. They have provided a link to some resources that we can look at. We've got bedrock throughout the entire county, through the entire province, right? So it's just mapping where those primary bedrock resources, and that's the key. So our aggregate resource area mapping currently maps those primary and secondary deposits, sand and gravel deposits. So these are areas that went through that extensive process. By providing bedrock resource mapping, we haven't gone through that process. So whether or not we're even at a stage where we can identify what are our primary bedrock resource areas, we'd have to take a look at the mapping that is being shared by the province to see if it's something we can recommend considering at this stage, or maybe it's something that we need to consider in the future.
Thanks for that, Randy. Okay, that's a good update from staff. Councillor Pringle, and then Councillor Eccles.
Sorry, Mr. Warden, I was just pointing to Councillor Eccles. Yes.
Well, thank you for that, because he's hiding behind that screen there. Councillor Eccles.
Thank you very much for pointing me out, Mr. Pringle. Randy, quick question. There was some concern, and I think there is, what I've heard out there, is that this document, once it gets passed by the province, is laid in stone, and there's no chance, if something is in error, and I guess that's where I'm going with this, can you explain kind of the amendment process? If it is an error that, how many pages is it? 486, not quite that many. 200, yeah, on page 97, that there is a mistake in it. You know, inadvertently, it happens with that much documentation. What would be the amendment process from our perspective, County Council? We recognize, oops, we've made a spelling mistake or something, about getting that amendment through.
Thanks for that question.
It's a great question. When it comes to
always
things,
a great question when it comes from West Grey. Thank you.
when it comes to minor changes like spelling errors or things like that, we can make those changes without an amendment. Where it's changing the policies, or in some cases maybe we've identified after the fact that we've got an error in our mapping. That would require an amendment process. That's very standard going through a new official plan, that you would have what's called a housekeeping amendment. That's an amendment that would be decided by this council. It doesn't require provincial approval, but we would have to go through an amendment process to look at making any revisions to that document. So say if after the fact, after the province approves it, we find that a policy is just not working, or we find some errors in some of our mapping, for example. We do have the council does have the ability to amend that document and to make revisions to that document. We'd have to go through a process. There would be a public meeting, there would be circulation of that document, posting on our website, etc. But there is a process to revise those policies and mapping if we find that A, there was an error made, or B, that it's just not working.
We save those up for a year or something like that?
Yeah, usually it's within the first year, you start identifying, when you start working with some of these new policies and the mapping, you start identifying some things that need to be changed. So we have a running list of, and this is some of the changes that you see in this official plan include some of our running list of some changes that we've identified just from working with the document on a daily basis that we want to see change as well. So with that, we would keep a running track of any of those changes and bring forward a recommended official plan amendment to council at that time.
Well, thanks for that update. Councillor Fosbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Randy just sparked a thought. So when we talk about monitoring the plan, have we revisited comments received in previous official plan amendments into our consideration of how we go forward? And if you could give us an overview of how the monitoring will take place in the context of ongoing comments.
Through you, Mr. Warden. So with that, since the 2012 version of this official plan has been approved, we've kept a list of those comments that we've received from folks in terms of recommended revisions to the policies or mapping, and some of those are reflected in this official plan. So we keep that running tally, I guess, of any comments that we've received or anything that we identify as staff or anything that members of the public or developers or consultants identify. We track that, and we either bring that forward through a housekeeping amendment, which we've done in the past, or update as a 5-year review if it's something fairly minor that can wait for that period. So we keep track of that. On the monitoring piece itself, we have a section in our official plan, in our proposed official plan, that we want to look at further and really do a more concerted effort in terms of monitoring the effectiveness of some of these policies. So looking at how we can, through data and through analysis, see if we're making a difference based on the policies that are included in this draft official plan. So for example, we have a lot of policies in this official plan that support affordable housing. So how we keep track of that, and this is where we have a planning data analysis coordinator who we will be utilizing to see if we can track some of these items. So see if some of these policies that we're including in our official plan are actually making a difference on the ground. And if not, then what revisions do we need to consider, or what other programs or initiatives that we need to put in place in order to implement these policies or make a difference on the ground. So that's just one example of how we want to better track going forward the effectiveness of these policies and making sure that they're actually being implemented and we're seeing results happening.
Thanks for that feedback on that. Okay, any other comments?
One more. I'm just going to follow up to Randy. Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Randy. And to that point, section number 9 in the draft plan is titled Our Tools, and it hasn't really been an area of focus. We focused on the 5 areas that you've talked about, and I just want to point out that I'm looking forward to seeing what revisions come from that. One of the items covered is development charges, and you and I have talked about some concern in cost recovery in some of these development agreements, where they're appropriate and all that wonderful stuff. So I thank you for that, and I look forward to the further revisions. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Prosper. Any other from council? Seeing none, are there any more comments from our public gallery tonight? Have we sparked any other questions? Well, it's almost 8:30, so unless I hear something else, then we'll ask for an adjournment. Councillor Eccles, Councillor Bell. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming, and stay tuned for more information as it flows back. Thanks.